There's a certain type of person who always seems to be racing against time. Deadlines aren't just deadlines, they're triggers. Work doesn't really begin until the pressure becomes unavoidable. Tasks get delayed, postponed, mentally acknowledged, but not acted on until the last possible moment. To others, it looks like poor discipline or bad time management. But psychologically, this pattern is far more complex than simple laziness. In many cases, it reflects how the brain responds to pressure, motivation, and emotional discomfort. At its core, last-minute behavior is closely tied to how motivation is activated. Not everyone is driven by the same internal system. Some people operate on steady, consistent effort, but others rely on urgency to create focus. Without pressure, their brain doesn't fully engage. The task feels distant, abstract, and easy to delay. But as the deadline approaches, something shifts. The sense of urgency activates the brain's stress response, increasing adrenaline and sharpening attention. Suddenly, the same task that felt impossible to start becomes the only thing that matters. This is why many last-minute individuals describe feeling more productive under pressure. It's not an illusion, there is a real neurological change. The brain releases chemicals that heighten alertness and reduce distractions, creating a temporary state of intense focus. In that moment, overthinking decreases, hesitation fades, and action becomes easier. What looks chaotic from the outside often feels like clarity from the inside. However, this pattern is not just about productivity, it's also about avoidance. Starting a task early requires confronting it when there is no urgency to force action. This can bring up resistance, especially if the task is associated with boredom, difficulty, or self-doubt. By delaying, the individual avoids these uncomfortable feelings. The deadline then becomes an external force that overrides internal resistance. In a way, they are outsourcing their motivation to time itself. Another important factor is perfectionism, though it may not appear obvious at first. Many people who procrastinate until the last minute actually have high internal standards. They don't want to do the task poorly, so they delay starting it because starting means risking imperfection. This creates a paradox. The desire to do something well leads to postponing it. Waiting until the last minute provides a kind of psychological protection. If the result isn't perfect, it can be attributed to lack of time rather than lack of ability. This is closely connected to fear of evaluation. When there is enough time, expectations feel higher. The work is seen as a reflection of competence. But when time is limited, the standards shift. The focus becomes completion rather than perfection. This reduces pressure in a counterintuitive way. The individual is still stressed, but the nature of that stress is different. It's immediate and actionable, rather than abstract and self-critical. Emotional regulation also plays a major role in last-minute behavior. Tasks are not just tasks, they carry emotional weight. A simple assignment can trigger feelings of overwhelm, uncertainty, or even boredom. For some individuals, these emotions are difficult to tolerate. Delaying the task delays the emotion. It creates temporary relief. The problem, of course, is that the emotion doesn't disappear. It accumulates in the background. As the deadline approaches, that emotional tension intensifies, eventually forcing action. Interestingly, this buildup of pressure can become familiar, even comforting in a strange way. The cycle of delay, stress, urgency, and relief creates a pattern that the brain begins to recognize. Completing a task at the last minute often brings a strong sense of accomplishment, reinforced by the release of dopamine. Over time, the brain starts associating pressure with reward. This makes it more likely that the same pattern will repeat, even when the individual consciously wants to change. Another psychological element is time perception. People who consistently work at the last minute often experience time differently. Future deadlines feel distant and less real, while immediate concerns dominate attention. This is sometimes referred to as present bias, where the brain prioritizes short-term comfort over long-term benefits. The task exists, but it doesn't feel urgent enough to act on, until suddenly it does. There's also a cognitive aspect related to task initiation. Starting is often the hardest part. For individuals who rely on last-minute pressure, the barrier to starting is higher because they are waiting for the right state of mind. They expect motivation to come before action, rather than allowing action to create motivation. This delay reinforces the idea that they can only function under pressure, even though the underlying issue is not capability but activation. Social perception adds another layer to this behavior. People who work at the last minute are often labeled as disorganized or irresponsible. While this can sometimes be true, it often overlooks the internal experience. Many of these individuals are highly aware of their pattern. They feel the stress, the pressure, and the consequences. It's not a lack of awareness, it's a difficulty in changing the cycle. This disconnect between external judgment and internal struggle can create frustration and self-criticism. At the same time, it's important to recognize that last-minute behavior can coexist with high performance. Some individuals consistently produce good results despite working under pressure. This reinforces the habit, making it harder to break. If the outcome is acceptable, the brain sees no reason to change the process. The discomfort of working under stress becomes normalized, and the cycle continues. However, this pattern comes with hidden costs. Constantly relying on urgency can lead to chronic stress, mental fatigue, and reduced overall well-being. The bursts of productivity are often followed by exhaustion. Over time, this can affect not only performance but also emotional health. The brain is not designed to operate in a constant state of pressure, even if it feels effective in the short term. Another subtle effect is the impact on self-trust. When tasks are repeatedly delayed, it creates a gap between intention and action. The individual knows what they should do, but doesn't do it until forced. This weakens confidence in their own ability to follow through. Over time, this can shape identity, leading to beliefs like, "I'm just someone who always procrastinates." These beliefs reinforce the behavior, making it feel fixed rather than changeable. Breaking this cycle does not require becoming a completely different person. It requires understanding the underlying mechanisms. One key shift is separating emotion from action. Tasks don't need to feel comfortable to be started. Waiting for the right feeling often leads to delay. Acting despite discomfort reduces the emotional barrier over time. Another important shift is redefining motivation. Instead of relying on urgency, individuals can learn to create smaller forms of pressure, self-imposed deadlines, structured environments, or clear starting points. The goal is not to eliminate pressure entirely, but to distribute it more evenly rather than concentrating it at the last moment. It's also helpful to recognize that starting small changes the dynamic. Once a task begins, it becomes less abstract and more manageable. The brain no longer needs to simulate it. It can interact with it directly. This reduces resistance and makes continuation easier. Over time, this weakens the association between action and last-minute urgency. Ultimately, people who do everything at the last minute are not simply avoiding work. They are navigating a complex interaction between emotion, motivation, and cognition. Their behavior reflects how they respond to pressure, how they manage discomfort, and how their brain prioritizes action. And once you understand that, the pattern stops looking like a flaw. It starts looking like a system, one that works under pressure but struggles without it. And systems, unlike traits, can be adjusted.